National Flood Insurance Program or flood insurance today, you really want to hear Ryan. So let's hear, for those of you who maybe didn't read your email, we are congratulating Ryan today because he just passed his CFM yesterday, and he's going to talk to us for about 5 minutes, and then he's probably going to go out and climb mountains or, you know, something really cool. So
woohoo, way to go, Ryan.
Ryan.
Woohoo! Thanks, Shylea. Like Shylea said, I'm the regional engineer out of Lewistown for the DNRC, and I did pass the CFM yesterday. I just hop on here and kind of talk through how I kind of studied for it. One of the way I'm kind of learner that I have to write something down to memorize it. So kind of like the quiz with flashcards, I made my own flashcards. Just various topics. I went through the FEMA 480, the highlighted version, just kind of went through what what I thought was important, what I could write down as definition. I'd write that on a flashcard and then memorized it. Just did those flashcards. Another link, I'm going to drop this in the chat. I found these on YouTube. This is a link on YouTube. They're down in, I think it's a presentation down in Florida, but anyways, it's like an 8-part series. It's about an hour or two long, and there's this gentleman there who goes through and does a really good job. And it's just something that I watched the day before the test, and it just kind of wrapped everything together. I'll share my screen. Can I share my screen, Shylea? I was going to show
I think you can if Tracy made you a co-host.
Just made you co-host, Ryan.
Perfect. Shylea, you got to stop sharing first, though.
Oh, yes, I do.
So I'll share and show the breakdown of the questions. So can you see that? Yeah. So this is the breakdown of the questions. It had 27 mapping, 30 regulatory. The one that kind of surprised me that there was a lot on and that I didn't memorize as well was the mitigation part. Just kind of, being prepared for what kind of mitigation or what kind of solutions go with that mitigation. Kind of going over mitigation a little stronger would have helped. Be prepared for, there's surprisingly quite a bit of information on elevation certificates, just knowing of that. And one thing that I got stuck on, but I eventually found my way through, was the maps. When they show a map, a firm, they talked about roads on the firm, but the roads, I could not find them anywhere on the firm. They were not named on the firm anywhere. But when I went to the flood profile, then I found the roads. So I kind of thought that was a little wonky that you can't find the road name on the firm, but you could find it on the flood profile.
I think I had that same issue.
Yeah,
but
so that kind of
wasn't smart enough to go to the profile.
That threw me off for a while. Was I looked at that map everywhere for that road name, and the road name was not on the firm, but it was in the profile. So that's one thing to take away from it, is use all the resources available, the firm, the firmet, the profile. That it might not be on one, but it'll be on the other one.
Hey, and Anthony just put in the chat that he had that same problem too.
So
good to know.
Yeah, so and they made it like the cross section they were talking about was right on the edge of the map, so maybe they intended for their own name to be there, but they cut off the map. So it's kind of wonky, I thought. So I'll stop sharing though. And yeah, Floodplain Bootcamp's a great resource to study for it. I guess the highlighted FEMA 480, there's the YouTube link I dropped in there. Yeah, just grinding out and memorizing the information, I'd say, is the best way to go about it.
Hey, Ryan, I remember Nadine when she taught about mitigation in December 15th class. She said it's one of the most commonly missed sections on the CFM exam.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for me, I went back and just checked my scores. It was actually a section I did well on, but I did well, the first time I took the test on that section. But I think it's because I went out to those IS classes that we also have that recommendation that you do. And I did those, and I think it helped me a lot. So
yeah, there's not There's not much in the FEMA 480 that correlates to the mitigation questions they answered. I thought like that's what everyone told me going into it was the mitigation is hard, be prepared for it. And I went and studied like the grants and different things. And I'd like to see some of the questions I got wrong on the mitigation because I felt pretty confident about a lot of those and still missed 5. But
Yeah.
yeah, just memorizing what kind of what each function, what each thing does or what it can do.
Hey,
The
does
things weren't
anyone
really
want to
important.
come off mute and ask Ryan a question?
The one thing too, there was no dates on the test. I was worried about maybe memorizing the dates like the Reform Act or the Disaster Act. It was more of what do those acts do instead of what is the actual date of them.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah,
There's a
there
lot
was
of
no
dates.
dates. I didn't have a question of like when was this and this. And the other thing too that had a few you could see a few questions on is things about wetlands. Knowing who administers like the wetlands programs. It's a little bit heavy. It definitely is one of those things that you know a little bit about because you see it in the joint application. It's part of one of the permits you need, but knowing who administers the program, the National Environmental Policy Act, kind of corresponding the wetlands to the Army Corps and things like that was on there, which could be possibly on there too. So.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the spill I got anyways.
Hey,
Is this the
Ryan.
first time you took this, Ryan?
Yep, first time I took it.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Impressive.
And I really, at least my studying tactic is I'm not very good at studying over months periods of a time because I just forget all the information from a month or 2 ago. So I just started last week and said, all right, I'm going to take this week and just took 2 or 3 days last week and 2 days leading up to it this week and just studied hard for it and just tried to memorize as much as I could on it.
Wow.
Hey, Ryan,
Oh.
congratulations again. That's awesome. And when I was at the conference, the person who actually started the association and did one of the first tests, they were actually there when I got the news that Ryan had passed. And so was someone who was one of the first test takers too. So they were pretty excited to hear. So that was kind of neat.
Yeah, thank you. So, but yeah, anyone got any questions? Let me know. I'm gonna hop off here soon. I got to go do some dam monitoring. So if you got any questions, speak now.
And did it take like 3 hours
Yeah, you get 3 hours to take it. I took it in an hour 20. I just kind of whipped through it
Okay,
and
now
didn't
you're
go
just
back
showing
on any
off.
questions.
Exactly. I was like, don't go there, Ronnie. It's gonna make us feel really bad.
But you do get 3 hours. And I think the 3 hours, I think it'd be plenty of time to go through it. You could go through it and go back into some of the flagged questions too. It gives you the option to flag questions. Like if you aren't sure about it, you can flag it and then
Oh,
it
okay.
bring you right back to those questions. The other thing too that I would recommend is I had a hard time. So I took it online using the Proctor U portal thing and through the Measure Learning and stuff. I was not a fan. I'm young and kind of tech savvy, and I was still struggling with the technological of it. I recommend going to a testing center to take it if you are within an hour or two of a testing center.
Wow. And
They
what
make you
kind of
run all these.
problems?
Yeah, they make you run like they make you test you can test your equipment days leading up to it to see if your equipment's compatible. And like my personal laptop, it's only like 5 or 6 years old, said it wasn't compatible, and so it was kind of a mess trying to figure out how to take it online. So I recommend doing it at a testing center, scheduling at a testing
Wow.
center and going there because their equipment's they have it all set up. You just show up and take it at a testing center.
And
Okay.
that's how I did it. And I found it really stressful enough knowing you were going to go take the test without having, something happen at my house or my dogs or somebody walking through the living room or,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, then technology issues. I have a hard enough time setting up for boot camp. So
Yeah. So do recommend taking it at a testing center.
Okay.
that I think you covered everything I wanted you to help share with these guys. And there's those 4 testing centers in Montana. There's one in Bozeman, one in Billings, Great Falls, and Missoula, right? Does that sound right, Ryan? I think
I think
that's
so,
what they
yeah.
all are. So,
So yeah, cool. Well, if no one's got any questions, I'm gonna hop off and yeah.
he
Well, thank
and
you,
Ryan will accept
congratulations.
drinks and congratulations next
Oh.
week at AMFF. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ryan. Congrats again. We
No,
really
thank you
appreciate
guys.
you
And
sharing
good
your
luck to
insight.
everyone. See you guys.
Okay. Well, I was really glad that Ryan agreed to share some info. I hope you guys found that helpful and encouraging for those of you who are working towards your CFM. And Tracy was saying too, when she was talking about going to the national meeting in Salt Lake City in June, it's a great time to meet people from other states. And if you are going to AMFM next week, we're going to be excited because we have the state coordinator director, Tyler from North Dakota. He's going to be there, as well as Harry from FEMA Region 8. So you guys will have those opportunities too. So without further ado, now that we're all just anxious and inspired by Ryan's, good success and fortune, let's get you guys going on your National Flood Insurance Program. There's a couple of things we didn't get to last week when we were talking about Unit 2, and I just want to make sure I touch upon them for you guys. That is let me get my mouse over here. Here we go. Okay. So again, he said you don't have to maybe worry so much about the dates as what happened when those acts of Congress were with the National Flood Insurance Program on certain times. Okay. Let me get my brain in the game here. So if you will notice, we talked about this timeline last week. In 1968, the National Flood Insurance Program was created by Congress. In 1973, they had to do a revision to it, and they tied flood insurance to the NFIP. In particular, they said when you're getting federally backed mortgages or maybe disaster assistance, you need to have flood insurance. In 1979, they took the program from being administered by HUD and they placed it under FEMA, who is who we work with today. And those are the folks who administer the program. And then, of course, in 1994, there was another major revision. And with that one, they did some more revamping of the mitigation program and disaster funds, which we'll talk about, as well as the community rating system, which is a discount program. If your community belongs to it, then eligible property owners who have flood insurance are usually entitled to a discount. So, all right. So why do we manage floodplains? Well, mostly because we need to have smarter development. Despite the fact that they went out and created dams and flood control measures, and we created the National Flood Insurance Program, we were still having losses and people were still getting damaged in floods. So part of this is we're going to manage, we're going to guide, I like to say guide development, okay, in these flood prone areas. Also, we can better respond to emergencies when there is a disaster. Now, just because you built better and maybe, you've got a better road for response and it's not flooded out, we still have damages. So that's why sometimes they recommend you have flood insurance. It's your one measure to help you in a flood event. Sometimes they can come in with some disaster relief funding, but like what we saw in June 2022, sometimes not enough. The ultimate goal of managing these floodplains is to keep people safe from flooding. And my favorite part, we're keeping them safe from themselves. How many of you guys have people walking in your office and they're like, I don't know why I need a floodplain permit. It never floods here. I heard it just yesterday from a guy whose house got flooded in June 2022. And they had to tear down his house and he rebuilt a new one. But they did it without a floodplain permit. He's obviously in the floodplain. So now we're trying to do after the fact permitting with him, which is a little, challenging. And he said to me just yesterday, I don't know why there's such a fuss about this. I'm never going to get flooded. And you're thinking to yourself, dude, just 2 years ago, you got flooded. But he may be right because he is 72 years old. He might not see another flood in his lifetime, but his relatives might, or whoever inherits that house or buys that house might. So that's why we got to get it right and getting permitted. Again, the National Flood Insurance Program, we like to think of it as a four-legged stool. And sometimes you'll see it presented as a three-legged stool. They'll leave the mitigation part out. But for the most part, we've got our flood insurance, we've got our floodplain management, which is how you're going to guide development. And then we've got our maps. And all three of these stools or these programs work together so that you can administer the National Flood Insurance Program. Again, the NFIP is just a voluntary agreement between the federal government, FEMA, and our local communities. You at the local community level say, hey, we're going to guide our floodplain development. We're going to adopt and enforce regulations that meet the FEMA standards and the state standards. And for doing this, the federal government is going to make subsidized flood insurance available to the community. Also, probably some disaster assistance or maybe some mitigation funds too. So at the community level, you guys are doing this job. You guys know what you need to do to run your NFIP programs, to do good administration of your floodplain programs. One of the first things is your community's gonna have a floodplain ordinance adopted. They couldn't join the NFIP without it. In that ordinance, which all of you guys should be sitting there in your heads right now saying, I know exactly where my ordinance is and what it says. Because if you don't know this, it's pretty hard to administer your program or guide development, right? In there, it's going to name a floodplain administrator, not maybe name them specifically, but it's going to name their position. It's going to say, this duty falls to our county planner. This duty falls to our county sanitarian, maybe the mayor. We just worked with one community last week who's really struggling with their program because they named it the sheriff. He's trying to run their floodplain program. I can't imagine that. All of you guys running around out there with 10 hats, could you imagine being sheriff and trying to administer the program? You're going to take in those floodplain permit applications from the people who are located in your special flood hazard areas. And maybe not you per se, but your governing body will decide whether to issue or deny those permit applications. You will, as the floodplain administrator, will usually make some sort of recommendation about that. This one kind of gets overlooked, but you need to go out and you need to look at those projects that they are proposing in those permit applications. Sometimes they get midway through and for some reason they make a change. And they don't realize that when they made that change, it could put them out of compliance with floodplain regulations. Just this morning, I'm so proud, we had one of our floodplain administrators out there doing a site inspection. That's definitely something you guys need to think about. And Tracy and I sometimes recommend do it in the beginning do it in the middle, and definitely do it at the end to make sure that it's what you permitted. You'll notice in red here, I have said to maintain all floodplain development records. This is a golden standard. Maintain those records into perpetuity. Oftentimes records get thrown out, but our buildings are still standing. I told you about the gentleman who's 72, who may never see a flood and doesn't understand why his house needs permitted, but that house could still be there 100 years from now. And if you guys have that elevation certificate on record, or if they happen to LOMA out, or if you condition the permit with a, you can't convert this area to residential living, you have those records in case someone ever has questions. Also, as floodplain administrator, you're going to help with the preparation, revision of floodplain maps if that comes to your area. And you're going to help those residents understand that they belong in a floodplain. Oftentimes we hear people say, I didn't know I needed a floodplain permit. Well, maybe, yes, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. But you, as the floodplain administrator, also have to make sure that you're doing your education and outreach. Are you getting information out there that they might be looking and know that they're in a floodplain area? What's the state role and responsibility to the NFIP? And chances are you guys aren't going to see this on the CFM test, but I think it's important to know how we all work together. We've got you, the community, and then we've got Anthony, Tracy, and I over here at the state. And our job is to support you guys. We can provide technical assistance to you. So can our floodplain engineers. So can our mapping program. I hope that all of you guys feel that we're, available and happy to assist you. And the reason that we are is because we belong to the Community Assistance Program. So back when Montana joined the NFIP, our state legislatures in 1972 said, hey, there's this part of the FEMA program, the NFIP program, called community assistance. And we know that our rural communities are going to need it. So every year, Tracy applies for a special grant to administer the community assistance program. She works with FEMA, turns in the grant, and that's why we're available to help you guys. A separate grant is Doug, Nadine, and Hannah, and also Sarah and our new person, Monica. They're over there, and that's where they get the funding to help put in new maps and identify new flood risks around the state. Okay, so DNRC floodplain program, our team consists of CAP and the mapping team, and then our regional engineers. So we had Perry and Mark teach in class earlier. You guys are going to hear from Brent in March. He's going to teach 2 classes. You just heard from Ryan this morning. And we like Ryan so much, we put him on that slide twice, right? And then you guys will get to meet Mickey and Linda and Larry next week at AMFM if you're there. So then the other part of our program is FEMA. And I just want to mention this because oftentimes we joke
Excuse me,
around.
can I ask you a question, Shylea?
Yeah.
Does each state have a cap, or is this something unique to Cascade County?
Nope. Each state has the opportunity to apply for grant funds to have a cap program.
Okay, all right.
South Dakota, you'll notice right here in this map, South Dakota is part of our Region 8. They got rid of their cap program. They still have to administer to the floodplain, and they have to adhere to their floodplain regulations. But they said, hey, we don't want to have a cap program to help our communities. And that's a prerogative. Tracy, I see you came off mute, so I know you have a comment.
Yeah, I no, that's true. It's a good question that you have. The other thing that's happening with South Dakota too is FEMA has to do all the oversight directly with all the communities now. And so there's not really that state, assistance that's usually provided to them. Hawaii's another one that decided that they were in the program, so was South Dakota in the CAP program, and they decided that they didn't want to get out or that they didn't want to participate. And then they're scrambling now with all of the wildfire stuff that has been going on and wreaking havoc, except like in Maui. So they're really struggling right now with recovery as well. So yeah, it is hard. It's not an easy program. There's a lot of stuff that all these states have to do. There's certain requirements, just like any grant. I mean, Andrew's on. He can tell you. I'm sure he can tell you till he's blue in the face all the stuff they have to do for mitigation. But all these grants come with a requirement. But our main focus is trying to help the local communities provide that technical assistance and support. Thanks, Shylea.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. Those were good points. I also just want to go with your question, Gary. I just want to point out one other thing about our regional engineers, and Tracy will correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that Montana is only one of 2 states in the nation that offers this kind of technical assistance to our communities to help you guys. They will review those floodplain permits and help guide the communities. Again, we do not tell you what to do with your programs. They're local, they're your programs, but we will make suggestions and guide you if you ask us. So our FEMA office is right there in Denver. That's where Harry's coming from next week. Some of you guys have met Laura. She administers Montana's program. I just wanted to point that out to you guys. So what does, the federal FEMA, what is their job? What do they do? Well, they're going to assist Tracy with administering the NFIP program. They're the ones that, kind of come in and assess and review and make sure that your communities are in compliance. And they provide technical assistance as well. And I know some of you guys have had their help when you're dealing with an enforcement issue or a permitting issue. We sometimes ask FEMA, how to guide you. I notice I put in red here, approve the community floodplain regulations. Those are your ordinances. And we sometimes, all of you guys are going to have to update your floodplain ordinance or your regulations if you haven't already done so. We're going to be reaching out to you guys and asking you to do that. I have in red here, FEMA approves that ordinance, hopefully before you take it to your communities and ask your communities to pass it. You should be giving that ordinance to Tracy and letting her have a chance to review it. And you should be giving it, Tracy will be sharing it with FEMA. Sometimes we have communities jump out there, take that ordinance, hurry up, give it to the town council, get it passed, and then they send us an email saying, here's my ordinance. And it's not quite right. So that's why we, ideally, I just wanted to stress that. Again, probably not on the CFM exam, but hopefully we're doing double duty here today, studying for the CFM exam and also helping you guys administer your programs. FEMA oversees the flood insurance program too, and we're going to talk about that here in a few minutes. They encourage mitigation planning. They administer the mitigation grant programs. So they're working with Andrew Long, who's on the call with our Montana Disaster Assistance Program, emergency program. And they're doing the floodplain maps. So how do communities join the NFIP? And I'm really happy to say right now we have a community going through that. They're joining because they're getting new maps and they weren't a part of the NFIP. But when you get new maps and sometimes they're mapped in, this community's joining for that reason. Anthony's working with another community that they're joining because, or they're interested in joining because it's hard for them to get federally backed mortgages. So it's really hard to grow their community or to get money for mitigation funding. So they're going to fill out an application. You need to adopt a resolution of intent, which just means the community, the powers that be decide to participate. They're going to adopt a floodplain ordinance that meets or exceeds the minimum NFIP standards. And then we're going to submit that paperwork. FEMA's going to review it and agree to work with them. Sounds pretty simple, does take a little time, but that's how communities join the NFIP. In Montana, we have 137 communities. And I just want to emphasize again, voluntary participation. Again, guys, if you have any questions, just jump in and ask me. But I want to talk a little bit about compliance. How does FEMA administer the program with our communities? So I have not seen FEMA be heavy-handed. I have seen FEMA guide, counsel, encourage, before a community gets in trouble. So if they're coming to talk to you, sometimes it's friendly, but sometimes it's also, we're friendly and we're here to help you, but you guys need to pick up or administer your program a little bit better. Fortunately, we don't have many people in that position. Yeah, Gary.
Yeah, I was gonna say, really the only thing that I've seen FEMA do is process a 1316 declaration. Other than that, I mean, the compliance portion is left up to the counties to do all that work, and the county attorneys to prosecute those that violate the regulations. So
and Gary, mostly what we're referring to here is if a community, and sometimes this happens, if a community isn't issuing floodplain permits, or if a community has some known violations and the community is not trying to get the property owner to fix those.
Gotcha. They're checking the community for compliance.
Yep. So
Right.
In Cascade County, you guys have a robust program. You guys are good about your enforcement. But unfortunately, a few of our other counties, we've had to help them.
Gotcha.
What do you want to add?
Shylea, I want to say, because it is on public record, just so you know, Gary, the town of Belt is currently on probation.
Right.
And they were almost, they were really close to getting suspended just a few weeks ago, or like a couple months ago. Anthony, who's on, has been really working with them. So there is some oversight, but I will say FEMA is good about providing support to communities when they're dealing with violations, but there are some situations, even with the state, they have to, their attorneys won't let them weigh in on it, especially if it gets convoluted. And you probably know where I'm going with this one, but I do know, like Tom Burney and I both work with Sam Malinowski out of Miles City for probably 5 or 6 years on a very controversial case that they were bringing to court. And so there was a lot of support and information given to the communities at that time. So there's certain roles, but then there's certain things that might come up. I mean, yes, it's ultimately the community that has to do the enforcement, but the way FEMA does it, like Shylea's explaining, is if the community is not enforcing the regs, if they're not, and that includes like not dealing with violations or not issuing permits, then this is how they leverage that compliance. And so they do provide that technical assistance, but it's, every case it is very much on a case by case basis on how much and what they can assist with.
Very well said. And I'm glad that you were using those examples, Tracy. Belt was also a CRS community, a community rating system. And so they also lost that standing. And so that flood insurance discount that some of their property owners was receiving, they're no longer receiving it. The good news is Belt is working on it, FEMA's working on it with them, but these are ways that, you know, communities, if they're going to be a part of the program and they're not enforcing their end of that agreement to regulate their floodplain program, then these are ways, you know, that you could get in trouble. And long before that happens, and I want to emphasize this, long before Belt got put on probation, for almost 2 years since I started this job, we were trying to help Belt. But again, you can lead horses to water, you just sometimes can't make them drink. And but now they understand and they're really working hard on it. So what happens if you're placed on probation? Well, there's going to be a formal notification to the community that they're out of compliance. Right away, all the policy owners, the property owners with floodplain policies, they're going to get notice that they're going to get a $50 premium fee. And your community is going to get up to 1 year to correct the program deficiencies. They're going to get told what they're not doing right, and they're going to get told to fix it. And then what happens if you don't fix it? Then that's when they're going to look at suspending you from the program. And what are those sanctions? Well, no flood insurance available. Existing flood insurance policies won't be renewed. You won't be able to get a federally backed mortgage. Okay, this might affect those of you who are veterans or first-time home buyers using FHA or rural development funds to buy. And then there's going to be no federal grants or loans for acquisitions or building construction in the special flood hazard area. And your disaster assistance is going to be limited. Banks will be notified about this, and there might not be federal disaster relief if a natural disaster or flood were to occur. So not a good time to be suspended if you have a flood. Okay, why is all this so important? Because we keep saying you got to administer your regulations, and if you don't, it could affect the flood insurance that you're receiving or any sort of federally funded programs. Look at what happened to the mussel shell in 2011. We know that our Montana communities get flooded. Look at what happened in June of 2022. So here's a question. Are homes in the floodplain required to get flood insurance? Not necessarily. You must purchase flood insurance if you have a federally backed mortgage. So if your home is paid for, if your home, you can buy it with cash, they might not be required to get flood insurance. The other thing that can sometimes exempt you from having to purchase flood insurance is sometimes homeowners will want to get a LOMA, and that they'll go and provide information about the base flood elevation of the home, that it's above what the requirements are, and with that, they can be removed from that requirement to purchase flood insurance. And we're going to talk a little bit more about LOMAs later in the presentation. So one thing to keep in mind, and maybe this is just because of my business background, but sometimes you can have people in a community, the home is paid for. We've been in communities like this where they say, well, we really don't have a lot of young people. We don't have a lot of people needing to get mortgages, so it doesn't really matter to us. But think about your older people who have their homes paid for. What happens when they run out of money or they have to, you know, maybe have some health issues that they need to pay for? They will sometimes go get a reverse mortgage, right? Where you can borrow against the equity in your home. That opportunity is not going to be available to them. So I think they're being short-sighted when they're thinking about that. Here's the question I kind of struggled with when I first started working with Tracy. Should development be regulated in flood-prone areas? Are we telling people what to do with their private property? After seeing the flood events of 2022, and I sound like a broken record about that, we know that a lot of those homes were either built out of compliance or pre the flood maps, when the regulations would have attached with how they built their homes. And FEMA has tracked this all over the nation. And they have said that if homes are built to meet or exceed the minimum floodplain damages, there's 65% less flood damage on the average. So there's this strong, and I, after June 2022, truly believe maybe you can't have flood insurance, maybe you can't afford it, but if you can build your homes with disaster in mind and you can elevate, it really made a difference on how damaged those homes or not damaged those homes were. And I went and grabbed this slide because I'm kind of an applied person, but we did all these substantial damage analysis, and you'll see the different counties and communities. And one thing people don't talk about is the Flathead was also they had some flooding during that same time period. And so we were up there looking at some of their homes. And Tracy came up, she calculated this, and I think it was really interesting. We looked at 476 structures, approximately 347 were in the special flood hazard area. So hopefully you're doing the math on that. I'm not great at math. I'm going quick in my head, but that's at least like 140 homes that weren't even mapped in the flood high risk areas that got flooded. So that's something to keep in mind. You don't have to be in the mapped area. You could possibly get flooded. 62% of those homes were built prior to the flood insurance rate maps. So that means they were built pre-firm. 30% were built after firm, and 8% we didn't know their construction dates. So a lot of those houses that didn't have that good building guide, they didn't use best available practices, those were your ones that got wet and got damaged. So I think these numbers, the FEMA numbers and our own state numbers, speak for themselves. What's the difference between flood insurance and disaster assistance? I think this is an important distinction, because a lot of times people think, oh, I don't need flood insurance. If I get flooded, the government's going to come in and help me, right? There's a difference. With the flood insurance, the claims are paid for all flooding events in all flood zones. You can be in a low risk zone, have flood insurance, get flooded, and if it meets all the standards and criterias, they're gonna, hopefully pay you out with an indemnity check. Flood insurance, you're not required to pay it back. You just pay your premiums and you have a policy in effect. Depending on who you get your flood insurance from, but if you get it from FEMA, these policies will not be canceled for repeated flood losses. You will always have flood insurance available to you. More on that later. They also have building and contents insurance, where if we go over here and we look at disaster assistance, well, in order to get it, we have to have a presidential disaster declaration to get it activated even. That means there has to be a lot of damage. Okay? Sometimes those are not made for all events. And that is really important. So you can't count on disaster assistance if something bad happens. And most of the time, that disaster assistance comes in the form of a small business administration loan. So you're going to have to repay it with interest. If that property owner already has a mortgage, the only assistance that's coming to you is in the form of a second mortgage. And that's that's hard for people to accept. They don't realize that. So maybe, as the floodplain administrator, you can share that.
Hey, sorry,
yep.
really quick. I just want to point out a lot of times, and I know Andrew's on, so he can kind of help clarify, so is Hannah. But I just want to clarify too, can you go back to that previous slide?
Yep.
When we're talking about disaster assistance, it's usually for if somebody gets individual assistance, it's usually to help them pay for their basic needs, not to repair their structures at all. And I think people misunderstand that quite a bit. Actually, we know it because all of us, DNRC and DES, we hear it every day going into those communities that were impacted. So there's, when you hear people saying, well, everybody got all this stuff every time there's an event, that's not the truth. That, it's not coming from FEMA under their disaster assistance per se. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're talking with folks, when you're talking to them. The ones we see recover the quickest, the ones that we see actually get like additional mitigation grant funding, are ones that actually have flood insurance on their structures. It makes it a lot easier. And those were the ones that had people in within a week, and started helping them get back to that, hopefully, what we consider that new norm. I think, let's see here. Yeah, and
Well,
Stephanie said it was a hard message for their community in Stillwater. Stephanie Ray is the floodplain administrator and the planning directors and about 8 other titles. She said the community was very disappointed in the disaster assistance effort. It is a hard one, Stephanie, and a lot of times people they don't understand that the difference. And I know that Troy Downing, our insurance commissioner in Montana, has been really trying to get that message out as well. Because that was a hard one when people were like, wait, we just want you to make us whole again. And he was like, did you have insurance? No. And then it wasn't a great conversation after that.
Yep. And I just want to tie this back to the CFM exam too, guys. They're going to ask you some flood insurance questions related to flood insurance. They're also going to ask you disaster related questions. And this is that part that falls like under the mitigation section. Remember in the beginning when Ryan was talking and he said, I didn't do very well on this section. I think he had a 58% or something. That's the disaster side. And then we're also going to be talking about the flood insurance side. And hopefully as we go forward, I've kind of tried to pull some of those highlights, but that's what I want you guys to think about. And that test isn't going to say, oh, all of a sudden, here we are, guys. These are your mitigation disaster assistance questions, or these are your flood insurance questions. They are going to have it mixed throughout the test. You might be looking at an elevation certificate and they're going to ask you something on that elevation certificate related to flood insurance. Okay, or related to a LOMA, which is kind of how I've tried to organize these slides, hopefully for you. Again, that definition of a flood, I'd make sure you have that. And Gary pointed this out last week when we were talking. It's that temporary condition of partial or complete water inundation, and it encompasses 2 or more acres or 2 or more properties. And Tracy also highlighted last week, a property can be a building, a structure, or even a street, okay? And I put down here at the bottom, keep in mind, it pertains to surface waters, not underground water. So you have to really kind of watch sometimes with the flood insurance claim, did it come because that water came over the surface, or is it percolating and coming up out of the ground. They're looking for those floodwater sources that, you know, come over land or from tidal waters. Could be snow runoff, mud flows, erosion issues, okay? More information is up there on that floodsmart.gov for you guys. Here's a few more definitions. The definition of a structure. So make sure we know our definition of a structure. 2 or more outside rigid walls, and it has a roof over the top. Principally above ground. They don't like to see it entirely over water. Your structure is going to be affixed to a permanent site, and it can include a manufactured home or even a travel trailer. Does not include RVs, does not include storage tanks, okay? But keep in mind those two walls and that roof overhead. Here's that terminology I talked about earlier, being pre-firm and post-firm. Pre-firm meaning built before your flood insurance rate map, and post-firm built, you know, after your rate map took effect. So if your rate map didn't take effect until 1981, all structures built before 1981 are going to be pre-firm, and all after will be post-firm. And all those ones built after, if they're in that special flood hazard area, what are you going to be doing with them? Hopefully permitting them, right? Let's just take a few 101s on flood insurance. It's available to all property owners. Doesn't matter if you're in an AE zone, a VE zone, or you're in an X zone. Anybody can buy flood insurance as long as their community is participating in the NFIP. And sometimes people think, oh, it's only available if I'm in a flood-prone, high-risk area. Not the case. Anybody can buy it. You just have to make sure your community is participating. Lots of times too, people get confused. They think, well, I have homeowners insurance. I should be covered. It'll cover you if your septic backs up, but it's not going to cover you if, you know, the river floods. All right. Only certain types of flood damage. And then we have this mandatory purchase requirement if properties are financed with a federally backed mortgage, or you're getting other types of federal funding, and that property is located in the special flood hazard area. When is NFIP flood insurance not available? Well, obviously, if the community doesn't participate in the NFIP. Or, like we talked earlier, if the community's been suspended, your flood insurance goes away. And I also wanted to just remind everyone what we talked about before with the coastal barrier resource systems and the otherwise protected areas. Flood insurance will not be available in those areas. And I just feel like that's a really good test question on the CFM exam. Gary mentioned this earlier, and we'll talk about this, but if a property has had what's called 1316 action taken, which means probably the community worked with them long and hard to try to get them into compliance. What happens if that person doesn't come into compliance? Does the community get penalized? Do they get sanctioned? No, the community can go to FEMA and say, here's all our proof. Here's how we've sent them letters, we've tried, we've done all this stuff, and they still won't come into compliance. Then FEMA will say, all right, community, we'll work with you, and we're going to take 1316 action on this property, which means it's going to be kind of have a permanent, what's the word? A sanction on it that says it's ineligible for flood insurance until they bring it into compliance. And sometimes that motivates property owners to, get on the stick. And sometimes they're like, that's okay. I don't have a federally backed mortgage and it's not going to affect me. So those are times that flood insurance are not available. When is it mandatory? Well, again, if you're in the special flood hazard area, those high risk areas, zone A, zone B, if you're in a coastal, if you have a government backed mortgage, if your mortgage is federally, you get it from a federally regulated lender, a lot of people, they can go to your local bank, you can get the mortgage from them, but then they end up selling it on the secondary market. And this is where they're talking about that you need to have the flood insurance. And then sometimes you need it if you're getting those federal grants or disaster assistance funds. And again, I have down there, what happened in the Flood Disaster Protection Act of 1973 made that mandatory purchase requirement. I do want to just point out, and this happened, property owners who receive disaster assistance from a flood, they often make that flood insurance a requirement for you to get those disaster assistance funds. And the way they do that is through those group insurance policies, the GFIPs. So with that, guys, we're coming up on 10 o'clock. I think we're in a good place to stop. And we will take up our lesson not next week, but on March 8th. We're going to finish talking about flood insurance, how it's kind of tied to your maps, as you see right here. And then we're also going to introduce elevation certificates. And I think we've got some really good info and stuff to help you. I'm going to wrap up right here. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, we do have a question about the cost of FEMA flood insurance. It's not cheap by any means. Can a community offer private insurance as an alternative to FEMA flood insurance? Yes, we do talk about, like, if you go to the Montana Insurance Commissioner's website, and even on our website, we have a link to theirs. There's a list of private insurance companies that are still available in Montana. I will say, I'll preface it with, insurance companies are in it to make money. If they are losing too much money in an area, they will pull out. And they are seeing that in certain states right now. But we have, because of our higher standards, because of how you guys are administering the program, it's a good bet. So right now, there is a company, or there are a couple of companies that sell private flood insurance, but it's in the form of a multi-hazard package. So it'll cover earthquake and wildfire and floods as well. So I would encourage them to reach out to the insurance commission or go onto their site. You can send people over there. There's multiple, tons of information there about the private insurance side as well. And then I think Andrew Long was mentioning that flood after fire. Yes, if somebody lives below a burn scar, probably be a great idea to get flood insurance, even if they're not in the floodplain. I mean, any property can flood. We know this. Yeah, it's really, really important that that especially in those burn scar areas, that they are highly, highly vulnerable to flooding because that watershed has been impacted. And so we do have that flood after fire committee in the state of Montana. There's some information on our website as well. Anthony is getting ready to start working and bringing that back up. And so you'll start seeing a lot of outreach going out to your offices about that as well, and the importance of getting outreach out to property owners below those burn scars. I'm glad you brought that up. Yes,
Hey, Trace,
yeah.
I went on ahead, and that question, we were a few slides away from that having an answer too for that question. So I brought that slide up that kind of addressed that also. So just to back up what Tracy was saying, the communities don't so much sell the insurance as it is the private insurance agents. But And then that's what she was talking about. You can get the write your own policy, or you can get it directly offered by FEMA. You can go out to that state website, like Tracy mentioned, or there was floodsmart.gov, and that phone number's on there. And then also our friend Schroeder, somebody's calling me, sorry guys. Let me get rid of them. Somebody, he's saying that Easy Flood is an example of flood insurance backed by Lloyd's of London. And he worked with one of those write your own policies or companies up in the Flathead. So,
Yeah.
And then Andrew's also just adding in that new policies can take up to 30 days to go into effect. So, yep, we've got a slide dedicated to that one too, Andrew. So good info.
And Shylea, the one thing I will say is, yes, we found out a couple weeks ago, Shylea and Mackenzie and Anthony and all of us that are in floodplain management, that FEMA is, yes, trying to change. They have changed their name of their insurance side. It's no longer risk rating 2.0, even though it's the same thing. They're changing it to the NFIP's pricing approach, which just rolls off the tongue. And there's been a lot of humor at the National Association about that as well. So just to let you guys know that NFIP's pricing approach, same thing as risk rating 2.0. They're just trying to rebrand it.
Yep, rebranding. I need rebranded too. It's Friday. So, with that, anybody else have questions, guys? Oh, there, he's got a little comment about that's at least the third name change that I'm aware of. It'll always be risk rating 2.0 to me. There you go. So, guys, I think we had a great learning lesson. I hope this is helping you guys feel prepped and ready for the CFM exam, if that's where you're headed. And if you're not headed to take the exam, I hope it's going to make you feel more confident and you'll have a better idea of how to administer your programs. And hopefully the rest of you guys, we're going to see you at AM/FM next week. And if we're not, enjoy your Friday, and we'll see you on March 8th. Where did this month go?
Yep. And just to let you guys know, we're going to have some record numbers coming in next week. So hopefully you can join us. You guys have a great weekend. Thanks, Shylea, so much.
And she's going to leave you with suspense. When she says record numbers, did you tell me 140 people registered
Yes.
for AM/FM? So pretty exciting. Maybe because it's centrally located.